Howdy howdy, I'm Something Noticeable, and welcome. Today I'm building my first ever custom mechanical keyboard. This project has been about 1.5 years in the making, primarily waiting on parts to arrive, but they're all finally here, so let's get into this. The parts that we'll be using are purple Bossi Doubleshot keycaps. I have a bunch of extra keycaps that I didn't use from this, and also an issue with one of the keycaps that you'll see later on. Some switch foam that I decided not to use, primarily because of time and not giving a shit. Some dragon fruit tactile switches with 63.5 gram springs. For some reason they gave me one of a white label and one without a white label. However, they're the same switch. Some miscellaneous tools and lube such as dielectric grease, Krytox lube, keycap puller, a switch remover, and stuff like that. And a piece of resistance, the Portico keyboard build kit by the Key Company, Mint. I went with this keyboard because it was made to be very beginner friendly and came with a guide as how to build it, saying this is the first time I've ever done it. It comes in a very nice case that I am a huge fan of, has a decent feeling curly cable, which I am less of a fan of. It has a USB-C end and a USB-A end. It has some included stabilizers. There's also screws and some other things that I honestly don't know what they're used for. If you do know and you could tell me in the comments below, that would be awesome. And included in the keyboard is a silicone and felt dampening pad, which gives it a very nice sound and nice weight. The first thing I tackled was lubing the switches. First, I used a little switch separator to separate the switches into their 4 components: the top housing, the bottom housing, the stem, and the spring. Most of the switch's bottom housings, though, got stuck in the switch separator, so I had to use a pair of tweezers to get them out. These next few steps would have been made easier if I had a lubing station, however I made do with some monkey dishes in the containers that the switches shipped in. I then lubed the bottom housings. I dipped my brush in the lube to get a small amount on there, and then coated the left and right side of the bottom housing until the switch had a nice sheen. This helps the stem glide more effortlessly through the bottom housing, and make sure that there's no scratching sound. The switch lubing process is incredibly long, especially for a beginner. It took me about 6 hours to lube all the switches entirely, let alone just the bottom casings. This next part is by far the easiest step of lubing switches: lubing the springs. There are many methods to do this, but the one I chose is called bag lubing. I put all the springs into a bag and drip some 105G lube into it. Once the lube is finally in the bag, this took me, admittedly, way too long to do. You seal up the bag mostly, leaving a little bit of a gap so you can blow up the bag, then you fully seal it. After you seal the bag, you shake it for about 2 minutes. After that, your springs will be fully lubed and ready to go into the switches. This next part is where having a switch lubing station would be the most beneficial. I had just finished lubing the springs and didn't want to leave the springs in the bag because I knew that once I was finished lubing the stems, I'd have to immediately deal with the stems. So I ended up deciding to put the springs on the bottom housings and just balancing them there, which worked out mostly. I only had a couple springs get away from me, but that was a lot better than I was expecting. Then these last 2 steps I had to do together because, say it with me, I didn't have a switch lubing station. To be fair, a switch lubing station is not at all necessary, but it does make life much, much easier. The first of these last 2 steps is lubing the stems. To lube the stems, I got some more of the 205 lube that I used earlier on the bottom housings and applied it to the left, right, back, front, and underside of the stems. I avoided lubing the little legs on the stems because if I were to lube, or more likely over-lube those bits, the switches would lose their tactile feel and become more like Cherry MX Browns. The last step to this is putting the switches back together. The reason I said I had to do these 2 parts in conjunction with each other is because I didn't have a good place to store the stems after I lubed them, so I decided just to put each switch together after I lubed each individual stem. It wasn't terribly annoying to do this, I just wished I was able to do every step individually. Next comes lubing the stabilizers. This process is much simpler. I say having screwed a few things up. First of all, I missed lubing a stabilizer. That wasn't too bad, I just had to lube it later. Then I forgot to clip in all of the stabilizers. I just want to point out what I just said there. I watched a video before streaming, during streaming. I did all of this, and I was like, yeah, we can go into this. I'm gonna lube them and I'm gonna do this all right. I lubed them properly, and then I get to the point where I'm like, yeah, I'm finished lubing everything, and I forget to clip in the fucking stabilizers. I'm a dumbass. Like I didn't realize this until like the keyboard was half built and I had to go back and clip them in. Like I'm like, how? Anyways. Let's just ignore my stupidity. Setting my stupidity aside, stabilizers. Like I said, this process is fairly simple. What you have to do is lube the casing that the stabilizers sit in, lube the wires of the stabilizers using the dielectric grease, and then put the things together, bada bing, bada boom, you have stabilizers. Now it's time to put this all together. I have most of my looped stabilizers, switches, screws, and tools ready along with the board itself. First I have to remove 9 screws from the base and carefully remove more from the plate. Now that everything is taken apart, I had to attach the PCB mounted stabilizers. This is where I realized I forgot a stabilizer and also forgot to clip them as well. For the love of God, don't do what I did. Now that the stabilizers are put on and I put the thing back together, this is when shit gets fun. I gotta put on the switches. I was super excited when I got to this point. However, I also learned when I got to this point that my lubing was very inconsistent. All of the switches felt very different from each other, from over-lubed to no lube to anywhere in between. However, luckily, this problem seemed to have mostly fixed itself by virtue of just using the keyboard for a few weeks. However, the switches I don't use all that often, such as right shift and home, still feel a bit different and a bit sluggish in comparison to the rest of it, but the rest of the keyboard feels mostly the same. Now that all the switches were put on, it was time to put on the keycaps. If you remember earlier, I said that an issue arose with the keycaps. Well, here is that issue. This keyboard uses a 1.75U right shift. The keycaps I bought didn't have that size right shift, and I didn't realize this at the time of purchasing them, so I ended up using the 1.25U shift that came with it instead. I could have just bought the keycaps made for the keyboard, but no, I wanted the LEDs to shine through. Now that the keyboard's done, time to get into the sound test. For reference, here's my old keyboard. And that's the keyboard. I'm very happy with how that's turned out, especially with it being the first one I've ever done. I will admit that there are a few minor hiccups throughout this keyboard's creation, such as forgetting stabilizer stuff and that damn shift key. I feel like such an idiot looking back on it, but I would love to make another one of these keyboard videos. However, they're quite expensive, so if you enjoyed it, tell me in the comments below and please subscribe. Welcome to the unscripted part of the video, 8 times the charm. I had a blast making this entire thing. The keyboard making process was awesome, the editing process is very interesting. I'm not the best at editing, but I'm really happy with how this turned out. And if you didn't notice, The part where I loop the switches and stabilizers were done on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/somethingnoticeable. You should go check that out. I may be live right now. I had a blast making that. I hope you enjoyed watching it. Thank you for watching it. Bombs away.